This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are joining Elle Grover Fricks to contextualize Jesus' teaching on divorce in its Jewish and Roman landscape.
I'm looking forward to it.
What do we need to contextualize about this, Elle? We know everything there is to know.
It's so clear cut. It's so black and white. Easy peasy.
We've never hurt anybody with this passage or anything. There's no reason to spend time here.
No, absolutely not. And nevertheless, whoopsie daisies, here we are. Another re-going over the same straightforward things.
Oops, all context.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Jesus has been laying it out for us. We are supposed to be Torah in the world. We are part of God's household, and so we are supposed to be walking these things out. Jesus has divine authority, and this is how he's instructing us to follow Torah, to interpret Torah. And so we've had anger, we had lust, we had, that's it. Now we're in divorce. Now we're in marriage. Let's be more positive. We're talking about marriage today. So we're going to do the actual text, and we're going to talk about that pesky little possibility for harm. And then we're going to do the Talmudic conversation and the Roman conversation. So there's your outline. There's your path. That's what we're doing today. Brent, would you mind reading verses 31 and 32 of Matthew 5 for us?
And it was said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for a matter of sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery.
Amazing.
Clear cut, as you said.
Yeah, right. If we remember our 6 columns that we made a couple weeks ago, one of those columns was thinking about the possibility for harm, which seems to be something that Jesus cares about when he talks about teaching and hermeneutic. And we want to enter this episode with the awareness that divorce has affected just about everyone in American society. Either you know someone, or it was your parents, or it was you. And we want to, jokes aside, really honor that complexity and nuance that folks have faced in their lives, and really be careful, even more than usual, that we're not posturing ourselves as having the obvious, easy answers to really complicated situations that involve real suffering.
I really could have used this podcast episode when I was about 12 to 14.
If we get a time machine, that's the first place we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Forget Germany in the 30s, straight to Kansas.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Very generous.
Okay, so right off the bat, we've got complicating factors, right? Jesus says, whoever divorces his wife, except for a matter of porneia. So porneia doesn't say fornication, doesn't say adultery. It just has the word, which is broad and undefined sexual immorality. So immediately we should have questions. And then when we look across the whole of Scripture for intertextual enlightenment, things get even more complicated, not less. So the first place that Jesus is probably referencing here is Deuteronomy 24. And it's a whole section that says that if a man wants a divorce, he must make sure he writes her a certificate of divorced. And Moses also says that the reason men are allowed to do that is if the man has found something, quote unquote, uncovered about her. So that's the most literal translation of the Hebrew there. It's erva, but it's been translated. Here's a list: unseemly, indecent, offensive, unclean, inappropriate, objectionable, and vile. And that's a really confusing list to me. Like, indecent could be like her clothing, huge range, I don't know. Offensive could be that she just had an opinion. Objectionable could be like how she wants to spend her time or what her values are or something. And inappropriate could be the way she comports herself at a social gathering. Waters are already very muddied off the bat from where we start here.
Is this the same passage where there's the manuscript discrepancy that Hillel and Shammai argued over that we've discussed before on the podcast? Is the same passage?
I believe so.
So it's not just the original rabbinic debate, but then the way we translate it manuscript aside, we translate it in such a muddy way.
Right.
Even when we translate it.
Right. In the English as well as in the rabbinic conversation. Totally.
Right.
Brent, could you read for us Malachi 2:16 in the NIV?
Malachi 2 strikes again. Second episode in a row. The man who hates and divorces his wife, says the Lord, the God of Israel, does violence to the one he should protect, says the Lord Almighty. So be on your guard and do not be unfaithful.
So before we had, if you're going to divorce, you need a get, as Marty's talked about previously, you need a certificate. Here, it feels like God's saying, don't do that, right? Violence is bad. God is not on the side of violence. And so if he's comparing divorce to violence, it feels like he's pushing back against divorce. So that's more complexity, more muddied waters, more confusion. And that's Hebrew Bible. Things in the New Testament don't magically clear up. We have this decree from Jesus, the statement. But then in 1 Corinthians 7, our boy Paulos pops in and he talks about things from the wife's perspective for the first time, which I think is significant. But he also dives into extra different rules about what if you're married to an unbeliever. Then it says, but what if he changes? There's a whole circumstance going on in 1 Corinthians 7, which makes it even less black and white than it already was. Do we have any depictions of divorce in the text? Perhaps actually we do. Aside from these prescriptions about divorce, we have a couple stories which are intriguing, at least to me. Thought they were worth mentioning. David, King David, is married to Michal. And then it says in the story that she goes off and marries someone else named Marty. And then David chooses later on to remarry her, which is feels like not in concordance with stuff that we've read in these mitzvot. And then in the story of Moshe, he quotes, sends his wife away. And we tend to think of that as like, oh, that's so nice. He's protecting her from danger before he goes into Egypt. But that send her away, and specifically back to the house of her father, is part of the divorce process. And that's part of the legal vocabulary of divorce. You send her back to her father so that she can be remarried. And then later in Numbers 12, it says that he marries a Cushite woman. And Zipporah is a Midianite, not from Cush. So is this another wife? Is this polygamy? Is this post-divorce? Some people try to say that it's still Zipporah and that Cush doesn't really mean Cush. It just means like pretty person. Hard to say. So I hope that as we approach this topic in this verse, we can bear all of that in mind with an open-handedness, maybe even beyond what we regularly try to walk into a text or a commandment or set of values with.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, unfortunately, I grew up in such a fundamentalist, reformed, whatever you want to call that, upbringing, that this stuff has just been drilled into me. And you just like, and I love this about what you just did. You just happened to quote a verse that is translated so wildly different than I was raised with, which was Malachi 2:16, which is what you're quoting here, right?
Yep.
Earlier. That's what Brent read.
Yep.
I mean, we have translated that for years in earlier translations and has been just totally thrown out. God hates divorce. And that's literally not what I was just actually studying this like 2 weeks ago. I ran across something unpacking, like, that's literally not what the verse says.
Right.
But translators have done this. And now, like, how many times have I heard that verse? And that's the verse, but that's NIV. Like, that's not even like Elle's crazy gymnastics translation.
It's not
that's
even
the NIV.
NLT.
Yeah, that's how we're trying to now correct the translation, the syntax, the way we've tied those verses together. Because how many times have I been beaten over the head? God hates divorce. It says so in Malachi. And yet that verse reads wildly different. So just knowing how familiar, I use air quotes, familiar we are with some of these passages and how we've used them, that should add to that open-handedness that I think you're speaking to. We need to be like real careful and like have a lot more humility about what we know and what we don't know and how we've slung this stuff around at people's expense.
Absolutely. I think that also when we get into like the nitty gritty of establishing Christian halakha, which is sometimes what that feels like, of like, no, we do not divorce, even if there's abuse or horrible outworkings of that tend to happen, is that there is a cultural component in Jesus's time that he could be poking at in his own way, telling it slant in his own way. Does anything pop to mind for you guys? What was the big divorce in their cultural context at this time in the first century?
Oh, are you referring to Herod?
I am referring to Herod.
Yeah. So Herod the brother wants to divorce his wife or marry the wife of his brother, right? Yep.
Herod Antipas goes on vacay. He stays with his brother, falls in love with his brother's wife, whose name is Herodias. The brother's name is also Herod, by the way. So
Yeah.
Roman naming conventions really get in the way of good storytelling. But so he divorced his wife, she divorced Herod II, and they got married. So such a big deal. After the death and resurrection of Jesus, there would be a full-out war with the Nabateans over this divorce. Herod Antipas loses that, by the way. And then John the Baptist, of course, is imprisoned and executed over yelling at Herod Antipas about this specifically.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about Jesus's murkiness, especially with the use of the word porneia there, which is so generalized. Like, is he making a political statement? Is he saying, you tell me, was there porneia involved? Maybe if there was, then it was okay. I don't know. I'm just asking questions. Maybe he wasn't doing that at all, but I think it was definitely in the original hearer's mind. Like, is Jesus saying this in a way that doesn't get him beheaded, but still criticizes earthly power? Or maybe he's just providing interpretation of the law for his followers. I don't know. But I think if we forget that that's in the milieu, then we miss a piece of what Jesus might be doing.
Or, of course, that Matthew wasn't written in Greek, and so the Greek word porneia is a bad choice. But I digress. Could be that, too.
I mean, don't get me started. We're on the same team with that one. So we can just pontificate together self-righteously. Be like,
when our self-righteousness works together, Elle, we are unstoppable. So that's great.
Good thing we disagree plenty of times.
Just pull the pin on that documentary hypothesis bomb, and then we'll go to town.
Okay. All of that is in our mind. We're thinking about what Jesus might have been up to. We're thinking about how do we follow Jesus and interpret Torah while maintaining care around harm, the way that these verses have been used to bludgeon people. But we are going to still dial into this conversation that we've been having for 2 seasons about how is Jesus innovating? How is he adjusting, dialing up or dialing back from his context in the first century? And we're going to use Talmud to talk about that. And we're going to use Roman culture to talk about what Jesus might be doing. I'm excited. This is the part where we have to buckle up and hold on to our socks because there are some pretty great laws we're going to look at together.
I am right now just working through the image of my mind of me buckling up in my car and reaching down and holding onto my socks. And I am more ready than I ever have been to discuss the Talmud.
Perfect. Last week, Josh took it pretty hard. It was challenging for him, so I'm not exaggerating here. Number 1 law in the Talmud regarding divorce. You may write your gets, your divorce letter, in ink, dye, red chalk, resin, or copper, but not with fruit juice. You may not write it on an olive leaf, a horn of a cow, or a slave. No, it may be. I'm sorry. You can write it on an olive leaf, a horn of a cow, or a slave's hand. So if you've ever been broken up with over text, just be glad a cow didn't wander across the field to you with something sketched on its horns and chalk.
Nice. Wow.
Only thing prohibited is the fruit juice.
No fruit juice. Peels off too easily.
Okay.
Chalk, though, apparently fine.
Is that like because fruit juice presumably wine, but maybe just the juice. But either way, like that is more of a celebratory thing, and this is not a celebratory thing to do.
That's possible. That would be nice and symbolic, but I do think it's just what flakes off really easily, because you don't want to send over your divorced cow and then have your spouse not know, and then it's going to be awkward at dinner later because they didn't read the horns.
Okay.
Didn't you read the horns?
Yes. Mitzvah number 2. It is often said that women cannot write a divorce letter, and this is almost true. So women technically can get someone to write the divorce letter for them, but then the husband has to write a receipt for it to be valid. So it's like basically women can't write their own divorce letters, but because it needs that receipt. However, they can practically do it. Functionally true. And that's true even today. Women are still hugely under-empowered to leave abusive situations in conservative Jewish communities. And there's plenty of documentaries that you can watch about that are harrowing and terrible. Mitzvah number 3, it has to be written for you. Your divorce certificate has to be written specifically on your behalf. So the Mishnah says if you're walking along the street and you hear the scribes read out loud, so-and-so divorces so-and-so from such and such a place, and you think to yourself, that's my name and the name of my wife. You can't go borrow that certificate of divorce from the scribes to use it for yourself. You have to get your own. Number 4, you have to have 2 witnesses to sign the paper. And those witnesses cannot be Samaritans or women, which at first just seems rude. But then if you think about it, it's a power imbalance again, right? If the woman somehow has the receipt, but she still can't have her community. Number 5, you have to say, here is your divorce letter, and either hand it at or chuck it at your wife while she's at her home. So you can't pin it to the back of someone's jacket in like the market and then have them walk by with it. You have to chuck it at her.
So you have to bring the cow into the house and shout, here's your divorce letter, and then slap it on the rump so that it runs into the home.
Precisely.
Got it.
Most important here are the lists of reasons. Here is the list of reasons you may divorce someone Talmudically. Number 1, if your wife embarrasses you. 2, if she burns your food. Hillel talks about this. You can go listen to Marty if you want a charitable interpretation of that, which is totally valid. Number 3, if you find someone you think is more attractive than your wife. Number 4, if your wife is not graceful. Number 5, if she, quote, brings herself into ugliness by not putting on her makeup. Number 6, fornication. Number 7, if her hair is undone. Number 8, if her heart is, quote, too frolicsome with the slaves and neighbors. Number 9, if she spins in the street. Number 10, if she attends the bathhouse. Number 11, if she eats in the street or drinks too greedily. Number 7, if she nurses a baby outside, not 7, 12. And number 13, if more than 3 women gossip about her at night. Rough. Last thing here's a list of reasons you can divorce a woman without even giving her her 200 silver pieces back for her dowry. If she talks to a man, if she embarrasses a man in front of his parents, if she yells, if when talking to her husband, a neighbor can hear her, if she's not contributing enough to the work of the household, be that sieve, mill, or oven, if she doesn't, quote, make beautiful enough clothes for his children, if she doesn't honor him enough, just period. And then finally, if she has struggled with infertility for 10 years.
Just such a range of different kinds of things we're talking about here. I particularly like the makeup, fornication, hairstyling sandwich in the middle there.
No particular order.
Goodness, what a list. So it would appear that Jesus is offering some color commentary on that.
It's a dark, not great picture if those are the reasons. Oh, I don't like your makeup, or oh, you forgot to put on your makeup, or oh, your hair is undone. To me, that gives a lot of insight and cultural context about why Jesus might just say, stop it.
Yeah, these are the waters that he's swimming in, and I'm kind of hearing you correctly. He's basically saying, listen, there's this reality that we have, this divorce reality. But it's not all this other. It's this thing that we've always had. It's this principle that undergirds and guides this process. It's not the myriad of other things that we're coming up with as reasons.
Right. It reminds me of if you're somebody who has like an over reliance on their phone, perhaps, or it's just super ready for a drink after dinner, but doesn't technically have a problem, but it might behoove that person to full out stop for a while, to be like, no more phone, no more apps, no more no more drink. And maybe like a decade later, it will be okay for them to have a glass of wine here or there, or hop back on the gram or whatever. But for now, for now, it seems to be a no from a pastoral shepherding lens. And that's what it feels like Jesus is doing here to me, in the context of the people around him being like, well, sure, she makes clothes for my kids, but like, are they that nice? Or I saw her spin in the street the other day.
Right.
Which also blows the doors off the Pentecost story for me. Women were included in the Pentecost, and there they are being wandering around the street like men are. And people are saying, what are they, drunk?
Right.
That was just not allowed for women. And we miss like the gendered dynamic of that, of their behavior there that God evidently did not care about at all.
Do we have a sense of how this list developed? Because I feel like a lot of the laws that we see in Torah, it's like, oh, well, if we look back at this story in Genesis, like we can see why that law is there. Is there something like that for all of these Talmudic things? Are there stories associated with each of these reasons?
Honestly, I would have to go back to the source and look around, which is a little bit more charitable than I feel like being, to be like, tell me, what beautiful statement are you trying to make from the Proverbs about how if your wife drinks too greedily, then she should be thrown in the street? So usually that is the case, right? That it's a comment on, that would be the best eye. You have the most tov ayin that I know in the whole world, Brent. So it doesn't surprise me that you would ask.
Well, I'm not saying, I'm just wondering if the Talmud works in the same way that Torah does, in like it's creating these laws based on some previous story, or if it's just, they're just being petty in general, which, I mean, I think they are, but also like, was there a reason behind it? Did they have some sort of like, they made some kind of an argument that has been recorded? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I think that could be the heart of Jesus's critique and the way he's shaping this conversation, is typically there are those reasons and there could be that charitable, but if you're not actually, if you then start leveraging all these laws, not for, if they have the best intentions, like give it the best eye possible. And this is actually rooted in almost like a Pardesian, like we're calling back to these stories. You're not supposed to be but you start using these laws mechanically, literally leveraging for them for your own self-interest and the exploitation of others. Yuck. And that could be totally a part of what Jesus is adding commentary to.
Right. The general idea behind those is, here's a quote that kind of answers your question, maybe, Brent, is that they're worried about the suffering and the time of the man involved, and also his eternal destination. So this is a quote. 3 do not see Gehenna, for they have already had hell on earth. Whoever has to deal with oppressive poverty, whoever has to deal with abdominal suffering, with the authorities, and he who has an evil wife. So it's like, boy, are we upset about poverty. Boy, are we upset about our tummy aches. Boy, are we upset about Rome. But boy, we were really upset by women, right? It's just like all thrown in the same thing. And reminds me from last week, right? It was like, if you talk to your wife, that's distracting you from talking about Torah, because apparently you can't talk to Torah about your wife. So same kind of vein there that I think, as Marty said, Jesus is addressing. Like, hey.
Right.
And Jesus breaks all of these rules, right? He does speak to women, and they are emotional when they talk to him, right? When Lazarus dies, his female friends come running out of the house and say, you did this. Why weren't you here? Right? She's not supposed to be talking to a man. She's not supposed to be talking to a man outside. She's not supposed to be raising her voice. All of the above. But let's check out a Roman marriage for a moment. What's the Roman context? Because the first century land is not just run by the Pharisees, right? It's split. Go back to those great foundational teachings, Herodians, Pharisees, etc. And so there's also this Roman context bubbling around, and presumably not everybody was walking in those really strict school steps, and in big urban areas, most likely, especially in the Decapolis, where Jesus spends some time, or his disciples do. We got some Roman culture. So there's 3 different kinds of Roman marriage. There is not just marriage. 3 kinds, and we're going to talk about all 3.
As bad as the Talmudic one was, I feel like this is going to be so much worse.
I mean, we'll see. The first kind of marriage is called conferatio. And conferatio is for the ruling class specifically. This is what the people at the top of the social caste do. You have to have a high priest at your conferatio. You must have at least 10 witnesses. You must eat a cake. The woman must be passed from the hand of the father to the hand of the groom. You must sacrifice a pig and eat it at a feast, which is thrown by the husband. And the woman has to dedicate herself to the new household gods. So minus the pig sacrifice, our quote-unquote Christian weddings are 100% modeled off of these pagan Roman traditions.
Yep. Wow.
We've got clergy, we've got parties, we've got a cake, we've got a woman being passed from the hand to the other hand. We've got
by
a feast. By the father. We even have conversions happening around weddings, because if you want to have a Catholic wedding or you want to have a Jewish wedding, etc., people often convert right before they get married.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's worth taking a sec to meditate on how much we get worked up about our Christian practices not being impinged upon and our rituals when they're not even biblically based. They're Roman based. There's no cakes in the Bible, right? God doesn't say this is exactly how a wedding should go and make sure you have XYZ. We're defending Roman practices. When we talk about women being shifted from the jurisdiction of a man to another man, that's still pagan. And I think we could probably check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. Important to know in conferatio, divorce is super rare, extremely rare, nigh unto not allowed unless you're like Caesar's wife. That makes sense because it's a ruling class marriage and it's doing political things and it's accomplishing treaties and economics. And so you can't just yank yourself out of that. If the divorces that we do have recorded, again, for the highest of the high people, they were entirely political, and the parents do that in order so that they could marry the woman to the new Caesar, to the new ruling, what did they call it? Who's the head of parliament in the Greek Senate? I'm not remembering the name of that. So divorce hardly ever happens. If it does, it's only for politics. And if you do divorce, you have to have another sacrifice and another cake. Lots of cake.
Are they allowed to have multiple wives? Is this an exclusive type of marriage, or is there only the one?
Well, that would be its own whole episode, Brent. It depends who you're talking to. The women certainly only have the one spouse. Like if we talk about monogamy in Rome, marital monogamy, sure. Other kinds of monogamy, no.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so what if you're not of the ruling class? What if you're an equestrian or even a commoner? Well, you have coemptio. Coemptio means purchase, and it is what it sounds like. So the woman brings her dowry, and she gets purchased by her husband to be part of his family. Not my total preference. Don't love that. But you only need 5 witnesses. You and your possessions now belong to your husband, and your name is changed to whatever the feminine version of his is. So I would be Georgia, Becky would be Martina, Maggie would be Brenna.
Okay.
Which has to do with the confusion with Herod's earlier, right?
Yeah.
But so you could divorce at any time in coemptio. So no certificate, no real closure or finality, because the way it works is the woman just takes her dowry, which is possible because it was material possessions like mirrors, right? Wasn't like in a bank account somewhere. She just picks up her mirrors and goes home. Ta-da! If she's gone for 3 days, you're divorced. That can lend to some confusion. Like, what if your husband goes off, gets into a bar fight, gets thrown in jail for 4 days? Are you now divorced? Where's your spouse? What's happening? So very nebulous, very just like, okay, fine then, we're divorced. And it gets even more nebulous from there. The last one is usus. And usus is also for commoners. In usus, you move in together. And if you've been together for a year, even with no ceremony, the idea is, you're legally married by now. If you want to move in together as roommates but not get married, one of you has to vacate your shared home for 3 days and 3 nights before the end of the year, have a mini vacation, or else you're accidentally married. And then same as in coemptio, if you're gone for longer than 3 days and 3 nights, boom, divorced, no problem, no conversation necessary, you just leave. So I would posit, therefore, that there isn't a really meaningful divorce process in Rome. Either you're trapped in a conferatio marriage or you just walk out. And given that approach, the idea of paperwork and finality, and you have to notify someone, even if it's by sending the cow into the house, that feels more like a grace, right? Jesus' commandment that divorce is possible if somebody is actively hurting you and betraying you feels like a healthy fence. You can get out, and you have to go through this process, which involves community and involves finality and a finish line.
Well, the Roman side of it was bad, but not in the way that I expected. So,
what were you expecting?
I was just expecting a different list of more ridiculous reasons, but it's just,
I see.
Their approach is just this casual, almost meaningless.
Very laissez-faire.
Yeah.
Which makes sense if your, spouse is in the army and they're going to be gone for 12 years. You're like, who wants to wait?
I mean, it really kind of ruins Gladiator.
That's true.
So I was recently in this last semester, my final project for this Bible interpretation class I was taking, I chose to do on the marriage passage you were just talking about in 1 Corinthians.
Oh, nice.
And I really wrestled with whether or not Paul, I think this is relevant to the Jesus conversation. I think maybe there's a similar principle there of whether or not Paul is, because everybody debates, is Paul doing this or is Paul doing that?
Sure.
And I kept wondering if not really, Paul's doing both. But I mean, is Paul doing both? Like, he's dealing with a culture where he's trying to give, like you pointed out, he addresses women first.
Right.
He's essentially giving them options within a biblical ethic. At the same time, he's also preaching against this laissez-faire.
Right.
Like, I can just kind of like, you can't just leave because you can't leverage the gospel for your own self-interest.
Right.
And so he's kind of doing both with this rule for all churches. Like, he has this guiding principle that cuts both directions. And I hear that kind of in Jesus when he's speaking to this crowd, where on one hand, you've got like no respect for the institution. We call it the institution of marriage, for this covenantal relationship.
Right.
On the other side, you've got the potential for all kinds of mistreatment and abuse.
Right.
And Jesus is essentially cutting against both of those crazy extremes and saying, no, marriage is meaningful and not something to be exploited to harm other people.
That's good stuff.
All right. I'm going to add Elle Grover Fricks to my bibliography on that.
Yeah. Sounds like a good paper. Just mark it with an A. Elle said it was great. So if Jesus is doing that work of cutting against both cultures in that incredible tell it slant way that Jesus does, I'm just curious about what kind of things Jesus might cut against today with the, we don't have a monoculture. We have multiple cultures bubbling around in our milieus.
No, Elle. We can't. We are not allowed to apply things. We only study them in history in a vacuum. We're not supposed to think. Well, this is good. It's a good question.
Good to know.
Good question.
Okay. If Jesus is so culturally sensitive, what kind of issues might he be worried about? Not just in divorce, but in our marriages today.
Ugh.
I think it's a question for for individuals and for communities and for the church and for society. How are we honoring one another? How are we putting up safe fences against harm and abuse? We can ask that in our own marriage if we are married. How am I honoring my spouse or my ex-spouse? Are there safe fences against harm and abuse on both sides?
Yeah.
We can ask that in our church communities. Are we teaching and modeling and supporting honor for both parties in a marriage? What are our programs? How does the pastor talk about marriage and gender?
Yeah.
Is pastor doing a whole bunch of wives jokes that communicate not awesome things that sound a lot more like those toxic Talmud teachings?
Yeah.
Women in their hair. I don't know why they always open that way. Now that we're all on the same page and we really feel at ease,
Yeah.
how are we teaching and modeling and having accountability against harm and abuse in the church, right? And then finally, societally, how are we encouraging honor and safety against harm? Are we encouraging folks to get trained in marriage and family counseling? Are we just telling people to stick it out without leaning in anymore, asking any other questions? Are we training social workers and law enforcement to know how to protect folks and de-escalate abusive and harmful situations? So lots of levels for discussion, lots of levels for wrestling. And I hope folks do that on their own, with God and in their own marriages, but also in community. That's what I want to leave us with.
Yeah, as a spiritual leader in those spaces, the two that just immediately fly off the page for me is those same principles, just in our own context, which is we love to value a contract, a covenant above a person.
Mm-hmm.
Like we love to hold biblical morality as a high, like this adherence to whatever code as more important than the safety and flourishing of the human beings that code is meant to facilitate their flourishing.
Right.
And we do that with marriage all the time in all kinds of different directions.
Right.
On the flip side, I think as a campus minister, we do have another cultural approach, which is it feels very, the last two options of laissez-faire marriage relationship. And I think there's a danger to that too. One is exploitive and oppressive. The other one is impotent, and it's also destructive, but on like the opposite. There's like two different wavelengths that do two different kinds of damage.
Sure.
And that feels very, very, very relevant to conversations today.
Ghosting. Other buzzwords that'll come to mind soon.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good if you're, that's pretty good.
If you're in for a bummer of a time. But also, we had fun stuff. We had cows involved. We had fruit juice.
We did. I'm glad we had at least a little bit of room for joking, because this was a hard one to look at and be honest about in our own context as well. Goodness.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel like diving into the work of the actual subject here, you can just work on that time machine that I need.
That's right.
Yeah.
To find 12-year-old Brent in Kansas.
Yep. That's right.
Next episode, we're talking oaths. There's plenty of craziness that feels at first a lot less applicable to us. And so you can just have fun listening to me read totally wild passages from especially Greek and Roman contexts. So come on back. Don't worry. It'll be good. Once again soon.
But you can find all the details about our show at BamaDiscipleship.com. You can use the contact page there to get in touch with us. The most recent way to do that is always available on the website. But thanks for joining us in the Beer Mom Podcast this week. Wrestle on, and we'll talk to you again soon.